afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to the Mashreq Sustainability Finance Dialogues. This is the second in a new series being hosted by Mashreq Bank, where we are going to be discussing issues around sustainability and finance. And every podcast will have its particular focus. And today we're going to be talking about the next generation, the youth of tomorrow, and its responsibility and legacy that it's going to be left with to deal with climate change and mitigation and the solutions that are coming forth on that front and what role it can play. And I'm delighted today to be joined by an all-female panel, which is fantastic. And to start off our half an hour, I'm going to be inviting and welcoming our host today from Mashreq Bank, Mr. Amr Al-Bahi, who is the CEO and country head of Egypt, Mashreq Bank branch. So Amr, please, over to you to open the discussion for us.
Thank you very much, Diala, and I'm equally delighted to be hosting this podcast. Look, youth now, we are talking about, globally speaking, adolescents and youth aged 10 to 24 years account for almost 1.8 billion people. That's 24% of the global population. And given the upcoming COP27 that is happening in Egypt in the next month, forums like the 2022 UN Climate Change Conference, the COP27, seek to engage as many stakeholders as possible for deepening the cross-sectoral collaboration towards reaching shared objectives. So I think we have really a great assembly of speakers who represent this cross-sectoral background, and I'm delighted to be with you guys. I'm delighted to be hosting this, and looking forward to an engaging discussion on that front. So let's start.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much, Amr. Amal Lainan, young global leader at the World Economic Forum. Perhaps we could start by calling on you. Amal, your current position is with the WEF, but of course, and I see from your background, you've had quite a bit of experience in the whole sort of investment side into sustainability as well. But today we're here to talk about the next generation of sustainability leaders. And Amr just mentioned COP27, of course, which is being hosted in Egypt. And of course, the next COP will be here in the UAE. So the region is very much front and center of everyone's attention. And so therefore are its youth. So let's take that point and just put the question to you of what you're aware of, how the youth already, or how can it be engaged within the sort of COP27 agenda to make progress from what we last saw happening in Glasgow.
Sure. I am personally extremely encouraged and excited that COP is taking place in Africa this year. And as Amr mentioned, not only is the world youth population 1.8, but 40% of the Africa population are youth. And it's important to engage them and make them part of the solution. So a pivotal pillar this year for COP is that it's an implementation COP, and we believe that it is the youth that will be implementing. And so they are absolutely an integral pillar of the way forward in terms of climate action and hearing their voices. So this is extremely important that COP is happening in Africa this year and happening in the global south to amplify the voice of youth in the global south and make them part of the solution, because they are the ones carrying forward the solution. Obviously, climate is an intergenerational equity subject, not only subject, but just a phenomena that is impacting us across generations. And it is the youth today that will also decide what happens for the generations to come. And so from our end, I think it's extremely important and exciting that it's happening in Africa, that it's an implementation COP with a focus on the global south. And equally, I see that the youth, the voice of the gender component as well, not just youth, but amplifying the impact and the role of women in climate action will be extremely important going forward.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Amal. I'd like to get everyone's viewpoint on COP to start off with, and then we can dig a bit deeper into different angles. Asma Rubia, SDG 7 youth representatives at the UN, and also founder of the Al Khadra Sustainable Initiative. Asma, thank you. You're joining us all the way from DC. I know it's very early there in the morning. Good morning. I'm sure you're having beautiful autumn weather and enjoying that season. We here in the Gulf are still in the heat. But Asma, thanks for joining us. And let's stick to the sort of COP sort of global organization sort of angle. And of course, COP27 and COP28 and COP26 before, they're huge gatherings, aren't they? I mean, you know, you can really get lost in there, or whoever you are. How do you think the youth's voice can be heard in that? I mean, Amal just mentioned it's going to be an implementation COP. Again, you know, how can the youth sort of take advantage of that? And do you think their voice will be heard? Yes, we hear it, but really, what practical results can we expect to see, and what can they be doing practically on the ground to be more involved in the solutions that we're looking for?
Thank you so much. Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, all those who are listening to us. My name is Asma Rothiya. I'm from Tunisia, and I'm currently based in DC. I believe so. Youth these days are doing their best to make their voices heard, and as you said, COP 26, 27, 28, and beyond are a great space for these young people to make their voices heard and like to be the decision makers and the policy makers of the climate agenda and sustainability in general. And for my own perspective, I believe COP is a great space for young people to first like meet fellow young people from different countries around the world. For me, like to meet people from Brazil, from Egypt, from US, from other Arab countries. It's a great opportunity to have all youth in one place so that they would share these different perspectives they have, what's happening in their countries, what kind of climate effects they're seeing, what kind of initiatives they are working on, to be inspired by each other's like advocacy, activism, and initiatives, and at the same time to connect with policymakers, decision makers, and high-level people to negotiate with them, to tell them about their needs as a young generation, and also how they see this, how they envision the future, how climate change is affecting them, because maybe the older generation cannot really see the effect of climate change on the younger generation because they're not the direct user or direct affected population. So it's always good to hear from the direct affected population and next generation on how we see things in the future and how we want our future to be, how we want us to be involved in climate policy, in formulating these different policies, in setting agendas, in also implementing these policies, monitoring the implementation, and also how we are thinking about and also our like sons and grandsons in the future. Yes.
Thanks very much, Asma. Lydia Sanz Lozano, Master Future Sustainability Leader, and Irina, Youth Representative based in Abu Dhabi. Lydia is a first-year student at NYU, and she's working and representing youth and engaging youth in the climate solution. Tell us, Lydia, you're right at the forefront there of sort of next generation out of high school, you know, into an academic environment where perhaps things can really take shape. Tell us a bit about what you're doing, but also what opportunities universities are giving to youth to engage, let's say, with the corporate side of the world, who are very often, you know, blamed for the climate problems that we have, you know, emissions, etc. tell us a bit about how students can be engaging with, at the end of the day, those who have the power and money to make a difference, if you like, in terms of what they're funding.
Sure. So thank you. And thank you so much for having me on my panel today. I'm super excited. We have great panelists alongside me, and I'm really looking forward to how this conversation is going to go. I study economics and political science at New York University, and I think it's an amazing opportunity because it allows you to, dive deep hand into a lot of the problems that we are discussing today, but really work from an academic standpoint on how you can actually find a solution. And, I think what's great about NYU Abu Dhabi is that they really focus on promoting youth-led solutions. And we have student groups on campus that really look at how can we go above and beyond outside of our classrooms, but really start to make a difference. So for example, we form part of a chapter by Student Energy, which is an international organization that amplifies youth voices for the energy transition with renewables. So as NYU forms part of that, we as young people are, making our part in how within our community we can raise our own youth voices to advocate for climate energy in a platform that is a university setting, but also brings other people that is not just the student body, but it's also all the other community members and outside, and how we can then from there collaborate with entities and companies that that want to form part of it. And I think being part of a university is an amazing first step because you're just starting out, you're realizing what you like, what you can do. But I think once you can realize how you can utilize the skills that you're learning within your subjects to later then apply to make a practical change in the aspect of, for example, what is climate change, I think that's where the solution is. And getting involved in these student groups or internships that that are offered is how can you, yes, take chance of those opportunities, but really focus of how can you make a greater impact. It's not just doing the internship or not just going to class. It's how you can then meet with those people and have long-term relationships, such as having a mentorship program or going to a company. Is how you can shape those changes so that you are, even as a student at a young age, you're putting yourself out there in the world and seeing how these solutions could actually be implemented. And then once you exit university, I think that's a great step to, to continuing to make that change forward.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lydia. Monica Cooney, Head of Strategy at Emirates Nature, in charge of the Connect with Nature Youth Program, amongst other things. Welcome, Monica. Tell us a bit about the program that you're running, but also, your viewpoints on, practically speaking, how, we're educating the next generation about climate change, and they have the advantage now of knowing what the impact has been, unlike older generations who have perhaps been responsible for it and were ignorant about what it is. Is it, too little, too late? How much burden can we place on the next generation to do what it needs to do? And where is the balance of that burden, if you like, between them and also keeping the corporate side of things responsible?
Thank you for inviting me and allowing us to speak today. Our Connect with Nature program began about 3, almost 4 years ago, with the sole purpose to drive it into becoming a for youth by youth movement. Our practical and initial sort of our ethos is that we don't want to be too prescriptive. We want to meet youth where they are. We want to bring them along on the journey, build their capacity, but then not stand in their way. So Lydia, Esma, all of the youth who we work with have different skills, have different interests. So we really want to harness those efforts and allow them to drive this conversation and action forward without standing in their way. So I think there is a sense of burden that a lot of youth feel. So much that one of our youth ambassadors said to me one day, I'm so tired of everyone always looking to us to drive the solutions. So I think what we need to do is hopefully kind of mimic what we're doing, which is to join them. It is a joint effort. It is a cooperation across generations, multi-sectoral collaboration. It's governments, it's corporations, it's nonprofits and NGOs. It's not just environmental, it's health, it's humanitarian. It drives across age, it drives across industry, and it drives across country. And so I think this is really what people are beginning to understand. And the youth have been saying this for years because they've understood how interconnected we are. And as you said, we didn't know this. This is their baseline. So they're already starting way more advanced than we are. So we walk together, but we can also catch up with them.
Okay, great, Monica. Amal, just back to you on that point of, and Amr, of course, at the beginning talked about cross-sectoral collaboration, and everybody kind of, it's a holistic solution, not one party is responsible. But let's talk a bit about the finance angle of this and where the youth comes into that. You know, how can the groups and the initiatives that are being taken by the new generation look to collaborate with the banking finance sector? I mean, is the banking finance sector too busy with big business and other things, or do you think there can be some practical collaboration on that front? And can the youth hold those kind of institutions to account with their ESG support, etc.?
Yes, I especially love that question or point from Monica about we're not looking at youth to provide the solutions, right? Like you want them to be part of it. And I think a lot of youth are also looking at previous generations and saying, you know, well, you kind of messed this up and you're looking at us to fix it all. And that's not fair. And one of the things that are important to like point out is basically that there's an opportunity to not wait for youth to get the experience to then fix, right? Like this is an opportunity to actually bridge those gaps, and and it's not just an opportunity, it's an absolute necessity and need at this point. So with regards to finance and the banking sector, you know, I love that youth can hold them accountable, but more importantly, to learn more quickly on what is needed to make projects bankable, to make them financeable, or to create investable opportunities and projects, and for both sides to be learning as fast as possible, right? To like really ramp up. And we have a lot of tools, and we talk about the blessings of technology. One of the greatest blessings of technology is faster adoption of this knowledge, that we don't have to wait for someone to have 15, 20 years of experience to present the best investable project that there is to solve for climate today. So I think the need is there now, and the conversations are happening between the solutions whether driven by youth or where youth are part of it, and talking to the banking sector, to the financiers, and now diversifying the sources as well, and both learning about each other faster so that we can make those projects financeable. We all talk about climate finance, but we don't know how to channel the financing that is available to ground and local solutions. And I think that's where there's a greater need to talk, to educate on both ends. And one of the things that I am most excited about is clean tech and climate technologies coming from emerging markets, where absolutely, we see that youth are going to be the backbone of it, and the financing would flow to that, so we can create better solutions from the get-go and amplify or improve what's out there. So I think it's a great opportunity for both sides to put their learning hats on and be learning together as fast as possible.
Yeah, thanks, Amr. If it's okay, I'll just bring you in. I know that you're going to be concluding this conversation for us, but as we're talking about finance and the point that Amal just made, which is indigenous talent here in the region, if you like, getting into tech finance from the finance side and from the innovation side, Amr. And just from the finance side, if we can talk a bit about that, we host a lot of podcasts around these discussions, and I had a couple of bankers or private equity people on a podcast recently, and they were saying, despite all the enthusiasm in this region and initiatives and government, huge government investment in the whole climate mitigation effort, especially on the energy front, energy transition front, there's very limited homegrown finance, if you like, interest, in terms of innovative private equity, etc. That's for startups, etc. Amr, would you agree with that from the approaches that you get, just comparing the region to others?
Sure. I mean, I understand the desire and the aspiration do more and to over achieve on that front. But the reality is, and I do agree with that, I think more needs to be done. And but the reality is we are seeing interest from various groups, whether you've mentioned fintechs, you've mentioned financial innovation. We are seeing groups who can be categorized in those categories, who are initiating discussions that in one way or another have a positive impact on climate change related objectives, on helping us achieve climate change related objectives. And it could be various things. Doesn't necessarily have to be a direct solution, something like solar panels. Doesn't have to be something so evident like that. But even a solution that allows, for example, for transactions to be done seamlessly or remotely, that in itself, if you take away from the equation the fact that someone has to go take public transportation or his car to go 2 to 3 times to finalize paperwork and finalize certain transactions, if we're able to make this more optimal, that is in a way also conducive of us decreasing the pressure from a carbon footprint perspective, from various other environmental aspects. So, and this is just an example, but in general, we are seeing interest, and we are also hopeful of more to come. Look, I mean, we're a bank with operations on a global level, and as in any bank, one of the things we consider and we are conscious of, and it's part of our decision making, is risks. Okay, and fact of the matter is, climate change is one of today's most significant global risks. So it is in it's in the interest of all of us to contribute and to help mitigate such risk, and help generate solutions that will lead to us identifying solutions that will lead to us getting closer to achieving climate objectives.
Of course, and there's a lot of questions around how much of that risk is priced into, banks like yours who are funding certain, obviously, clients' activities. Asma, if we could just go back to you on that front to an extent, in terms of the youth point of view towards the finance industry, any exposure you've had to that. Does your generation feel that banks and other types of financing mechanisms are, for example, when they're making loans to projects or funding certain initiatives, is your generation monitoring those ESG sort of EE credentials, let's say, that the finance sector is giving to projects? Do you think that youth should be getting more involved in the nitty-gritty of how things are being financed, and if they're meeting the E part of the ESG, if you like? How involved can the youth get in that particular angle?
Sure, I believe there's a lot to be done, honestly, in this area, in terms of especially financing for sustainability, because from my experience participating in different youth projects and conferences in the energy space, there has been a huge focus on financing for sustainable energy and for sustainability in general, and that young people are really requesting support from different stakeholders, from banks and also governments, that they really need financing support, and not only having the money, but also knowing how to manage this money the best way possible. And also, as you said, ESG, how they're gonna focus on the environmental aspects, the social aspects, and the governance aspects, and how they would use this money the best way possible to implement their projects. I believe banks also need to give more support to young people in terms of facilitating loans and other financing models. For example, for loans, having interest-free loans for youth projects that focus on sustainability and the environment, and also giving them other forms of support. One of the examples, these days, youth are having an issue attending COP27, and I believe it will be the same for COP28, especially youth from the global south, even though there are a lot of youth who are still in the Arab region, but they might not be able to afford to attend COP27 in terms of accommodation, flight costs, etc. And they really want to be there in Egypt, attend the negotiations, make their voices heard, and see what's happening there and how COP would be. But they're having a huge challenge in terms of financing their participation. So I believe if banks would also give more financial support for these young people and also connect them with experts in the industry, other than giving them the money, also giving them the technical support or kind of like coaching or mentorship on how best they can use this money and how they can connect with experts and senior people from this industry to implement their projects the best way possible to have efficiency and effectiveness at the same time.
That's really interesting, yes, especially that last point of the advisory side of things. I mean, getting the money is one thing. Monica, let's address that, please, if we can. Your experience, do you feel that the finance sector in general is supportive enough in terms of the terms that they offer, startups or solutions that are looking to plug into this whole climate solution? And on the advisory front, that's very interesting. Also, the sort of continuity of that, and how much of an effect do you think that would have if it were to improve?
I think these are really great points, not just for youth, but for a lot of the work that, say, our organization does. We're constantly looking for what is called bankable project, and the region still is rather risk averse. So we're constantly striving to work with partners and corporates, and including investors and bankers, to really sort of, how do we de-risk these projects? How do we eliminate these barriers for investment? And then how do we mobilize that capital towards innovations, underfunded research areas, and then youth-led solutions? So I think, it's part and parcel. You can't, of a much bigger picture and a much bigger conversation. All of these things are really critical to, the health of the planet. And then this is what we're striving to achieve. The youth is a part of that. So from advancing that, all of it, from our view, goes hand in hand.
Okay, Lydia, how about let's get your point of view on that? You're obviously still at college, but do you feel that there is enough sort of outreach, if you like, from the corporate world we talked earlier about what you're doing and what students can do, especially on the trying to sort of connect what they're studying and link into the corporate world. But how much do you know, or are you exposed to, in terms of how the finance sector can help on that front with certain projects and initiatives at your level, if you like?
Yeah, sure. I think, what Asma's brought up really is very clear, is that, there's often a lack of support, especially at a young level. There's these amazing people that have amazing solutions in place, but frankly do not have the access to finance their projects, and therefore they don't really go really far from there. So it's about how can you make these solutions be known to other people? How can you make them really be able to access the finance that's needed? Because there are solutions in place and they're often very young led, but because there's no finance available or they struggle to access it, they really do get stuck in being these small scale projects that could otherwise have a much larger impact. So, I think there's progress, and I think youth-led organizations are really paving the way of how they are actually connecting young people with the corporate world through, there's projects, there's grants that are really working through how can they bring these small-scale youth-led solutions, how can they give them the finance to access it. And, I've mentioned it before, being part of Student Energy as an organization is a super helpful resource because they really do work on creating young-led projects and, and innovations and advisory groups that really focus on targeting these small scale projects, but how can we also give them support, advice, finance? So I think there is progress, there is work being done by youth-led organizations, but obviously there's a lot more that can be done because, the solutions, as we've said, are there. It's just about how can we actually amplify them so they can have a much, much larger impact. Because if we, if we're able to tackle that, and finance is a huge aspect that would make that possible, then, we're one step a lot closer to, solving a lot of the challenges that climate change faces.
Yeah, Emma, let's talk a bit about that and just do a bit of a comparison, if you like. Take a 5,000-foot view, global perspective, let's say, on the sort of best practices of how the thing that we're talking about here, which is, access to finance, access to continued advisory. We're obviously focusing on the Middle East here today and the global South, let's say. But how would that compare, this particular question? How would you compare regions, in the United States versus Europe versus Asia, global South? Is there a huge diversity in how much progress is being made on the finance front for these campaigns, for these initiatives?
The reality is, yes, the gap is very wide, and it's by virtue of the leading financial institutions are still in the West, and these are the ones leading the direction and the conversation. So it's natural to see that they are more advanced in terms of also structuring what climate finance looks like. And I think, again, that is why it is important that COP is happening in the global South this year. It's happening in UAE next year, to make emerging markets more involved in how we structure those climate finance conversations or structures. But at the other flip side of it is that, when we have, like this year, a war in Ukraine and financial markets being impacted, it impacts what happens in the world of climate finance and these solutions. And so we're still seeing that even though the global South were much lesser contributors and continue to be less contributors to climate change, we hold the burden of the consequences and without as much say in the solutions, and especially with structuring climate finance products. So I think the gap is wide. However, there are opportunities and an increasing need to really make it work for emerging markets and the global South, because increasingly, as we see, we cannot take in a year like this that climate action and climate finance takes a back step or becomes less of a priority, given the state of global affairs and the state of the global economy. At the same time, it is up to the global South to make that voice or to make that structural change, because leading financial institutions continue to be from the West, and they are showing commitment. They are leading the path forward. But I think that is the importance of the negotiations and platforms that provided at COP to balance the conversation and to balance the solutions that are currently we're developing as we go.
Well, that's interesting, yeah, and of course, but the flip side of that coin, and I'll go back to Amr for closing comments on this and ask for his opinion on that in particular. But Monica, to you first on that, not to get too financially technical, but of course, the world, as Emma just mentioned, is going through quite a turbulent financial time. And let's not get too much into those details on this conversation. But there's a lot of uncertainty out there suddenly. Whereas a year ago we had COVID, but we were recovering from COVID and everything was looking great. Of course, now we have inflation. We have interest rates going up. We have crisis in Europe with energy. This region is doing okay. We've got healthy oil prices. We've got good coffers are being filled up from a revenue point of view. Monica, do you feel like that? Are you sensing that there's any hesitation in the funding of projects given this uncertainty that we're living in today, or in this region, particularly in the Gulf? We're relatively protected, and our initiatives sort of going ahead in full force, or have we seen some hesitation during COVID, post-COVID on certain climate initiatives?
I mean, I think there are a lot of questions in there. It's a big question. Within regionally, yes, we are a little bit relatively protected. I am not a financial advisor, but everyone says, the looming recession is going to affect the entire planet. So, organizations like us have to really focus and prioritize where we invest our time. And then the same thing with engaging with our partners. accelerating the energy transition is incredibly important, but also investing in things like natural capital, exploring new areas for science and innovation. All of these things, I think we're really nicely placed in the Middle East and especially in the GCC region to bring those projects to life. Beyond that, with the youth, bringing them alongside this is to help inspire them, right? We want to also demonstrate that we don't want to just do business as usual. They aren't interested in that. 2 years ago, about 2 years ago, we had 10 majlises with local ministers, and we had 1,600 youth come in, and they lent their voice to the government. 8 out of 10 of them said we do not want to go back to pre-COVID normal. So I think not only regionally, but also for us as an organization, these are the things that we are focusing on.
Yeah, and I mean, that's very true. And COVID, showed us and taught us many things, but of course it highlighted what could happen if people were conserving here and there and cutting down on certain things and working remotely and all those things that are having an impact on the climate. Lydia, just a quick question back to you before we wrap up. Do you feel like enough of you, I mean, you're very involved and hats off to you, you're doing an incredible job and you're studying at the same time. But there aren't enough of you, are there, really? Do you think you have buy-in from your generation, or are you kind of out there at NYU just campaigning your fellow students to join you?
Yeah. So I started this when I was like 17, and I remember so vividly that I went to the first IRENA Youth Forum, and I actually met Asma there. And I was like the youngest, and I, at the start, I felt very overwhelmed because I was like, I'm the youngest I'm in a room with 25-year-olds who have their own companies and they know what they're doing and they've been advocating for the longest time. But I'm here, I just care about my planet and I want to try and make a difference. And, fast forward to 3 years, I'm here, I'm in a discussion with all of you. And I think it just kind of goes to show that if you genuinely care about your planet, if you genuinely want to make a change, there are resources and there are people out there that will help you and that will show you how you can take one step at a time and move forward. If you would have asked me 3 years ago when I was meeting Asma, like, oh, by the way, this would be you in 3 years, you'd be going to your first COP in Egypt, I would be like, you're crazy. That's not possible. I could not do that. And I think that's kind of what I want to advocate for young people, is that there are so many young people out there that care about their planet, who want to make a difference, but frankly, think that they can't, that they're one of the only people that no one's going to listen them into a room, that they just frankly cannot make anything happen for themselves. And I think that's where they're wrong. And they're not wrong because they have this pessimistic way, but frankly, because they haven't been shown that there is a possibility that that can make it happen. So I think this panel of young people and young women clearly demonstrates that if you care about your planet, if you care about making a difference, take it one step at a time, because together we can make change possible. And I think that's a great way to just end this conversation from here. Is like, together we stand united, and there's 20% of all young people around the world that we can make a difference, and it's up to us if we want to see that make change happen. And it's not just one of us that is fighting, it's everyone, is how we can bring young people together to really make a positive change.
Great, Lydia. Well, that's well said. Amar, we're going to loop back to you now. I'm afraid we have run out of time, but I'd like to give you a couple of minutes to wrap up. And COP27 is happening there on your turf in Egypt, and there was this question of that the youth doesn't have enough access. You're not in charge of COP, so I'm not going to put that as your burden. But again, just tell us how excited Egypt as a country is to be hosting this, and what the finance community based there can also do to encourage, to bring in youth, etc., into the equation.
Thank you so much. And it's not really, I don't look at it as, a burden being placed, because as I said, and I really mean it, this is something that has to be done collaboratively from across all stakeholders, and certainly the financial sector and banks also have a pivotal role to play in that. So Egypt is tremendously excited, and I speak as an Egyptian and as member of the banking and business community in Egypt. It is very important and that we're hosting such a global event on our territory. We're looking forward for this to start dialogue and start awareness, whether in Egypt or in the region, on the importance of these topics and the further proliferation of these ideas and spreading them across multi-segments of society.
And do you think, I mean, let me put the question to you. Do you think that the current global economic turmoil, for better, for lack of a better word, is that going to be a distraction, do you think, to the whole climate mitigation agenda?
Look, as I said, climate change is one of the primary risks that we're facing as a globe. So at any point in time, there's going to be ups and downs, and there's going to be economic cycles, and there's going to be disturbances here or there. I fully acknowledge that the scale that we're talking about here, and you've mentioned some of the factors from the inflationary environment to other conflicts and other challenges. We're just getting out of COVID. So I fully understand it, but we really don't have the luxury to say, that, we don't have to apply enough focus on this for now to deal with such matters until times are more stable. This is an ongoing endeavor that we are pursuing, and it is our duty and obligation as stakeholders, as a community, to accelerate actions on that matter and start accelerating the path. So with collaboration with others, we keep on building on it. And maybe let me wrap up by saying that I was highly impressed by the dialogue and the discussion and the opinions voiced today on this podcast. And I'm not overstating when I'm saying that, just like we have mentioned that all contributions from all stakeholders are required, are necessary, listening and hearing solutions from youth is critical, and it's, if you want to call it, it is also what is required from them, is to think, formulate ideas, mobilize themselves, and voice their views. Youth are a critical part of the solution, and we need to hear these ideas. And from what I've heard today, it's quite encouraging. So I just want to perhaps thank all the participants, yourself, of course, for your moderation of the session, and really hope we have a successful and engaging and a COP27 that opens the door further and accelerates our journey further towards such global issues, towards finding solutions and mitigations to such global risks and global issues. Thank you.
Thanks so much to Amr Bahi from Mashreq Bank for hosting this today, and we're passing the baton on to you, Lydia, and you, Asma, and Monica, and Amal to carry on with these issues and put the pressure on, keep the pressure up on everybody. So thank you very much, ladies, for joining us, and Amr as well for hosting. Thank you so much. I wish we had more time, but it is a continuing conversation, and best of luck to the next generation on that front. And hopefully we'll see some of you at COP27 and COP28 as well. Thank you so much, and thanks to Mashreq Bank for hosting today.